You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got some big news from the U.S. Appeals Court in D.C. Now, for anybody watching, remember that the question of Trump having immunity is being considered by both the D.C. Appeals Court and by the U.S. Supreme Court. And if he's found to have immunity, Trump's federal lawsuit disappears. So, Glenn, what's the update in Appeals Court?
Yeah, so the appeals court just put this on a lightning fast track. Now, let me tell you, Brian, the appellate court that we're talking about is the DC Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. Back in the day as a federal prosecutor, I argued appeals for the government in that court. And what I can tell you is they ordinarily take their time. So when we would file briefs, we would wait for months and months before the court would set the case for oral argument, and then it might take many, many months after the oral argument to actually get an opinion out of the court. Well, here is what the DC Federal Circuit Court of Appeals just did. They said, okay, all of the briefs in this case on the question of whether Donald Trump is a king is above the law and can commit all the crimes he wants in office with a complete pass, right? A get out of jail free card. They ordered all of the briefs to be filed in the appellate court by January 2nd. They gave the parties a week or 10 days. And then they just announced that once we have all the briefs in on January 2nd, we're going to have oral argument in the case on January 9, 1 week later. And I have a feeling we're going to see an opinion out of that court literally within days of the January 9 oral arguments. This is moving at light speed and really unusual for the appellate court.
Now, what are the implications of the Supreme Court hearing this at the same time? Does that mean that the arguments are still going to happen in the appeals court, even as this whole process is being considered in the U.S. Supreme Court?
I can't answer that question because this is so unusual. Now, first of all, people should know there is a vehicle, a procedural vehicle that allows Jack Smith to do what he did. And what he did is kind of a legal belt and suspenders. First, because Donald Trump appealed Judge Chutkan's ruling that says he can be prosecuted for his crimes, he appealed that to the DC Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. Jack Smith filed that motion with them saying, please just move this through the system at light speed. And the appellate court said, you got it, we're doing it. At the same time, he filed for review in the Supreme Court, and he urged them, even if the Court of Appeals is moving it very quickly, we would actually like you to take it immediately. Because let's face it, even if it does work its way through the appeals court, it's going to end up in the Supreme Court anyway. So Jack Smith said to the Supreme Court, how about you just take it right out of Judge Chutkan's hands, leapfrog it over the appeals court, and just decide it promptly yourself. So right now, Brian, it is on both tracks. They're both kind of racing toward the goal line. We just don't know which court is going to get there first at this point.
But you do expect that the U.S. Supreme Court will be taking up this issue regardless of how quickly it moves in the appeals court, correct?
Also a good question. I think the smart money is riding on, yes, the Supreme Court, they think they're the biggest dogs on the block. They're going to want to have a say in this presidential immunity thing. However, here's the dark horse possibility. Because there is absolutely no law supporting the notion that a president can't be prosecuted for his crimes. If that were true, he could just, line up his political opponents in the Oval Office and shoot them through the head. If that were true, Joe Biden could commit all the crimes he wants to retain the power of the presidency and never leave, right? There is absolutely no law. There are only three sources of law. There's a statute, federal law. There is no statute saying a president can't be prosecuted. There is case law. There's appellate law. Precedent. There is no precedent saying a president can't be prosecuted. And there's the Constitution. That is the third source of law. And there's nothing in the Constitution that says a president can't be prosecuted for his crimes. So that is a long-winded answer to the question. Is it an absolute certainty that the Supreme Court will take it up if the DC Federal Circuit Court of Appeals says, just like Judge Chutkan said, there's no law. A president's not a king, and a president can be prosecuted. The Supreme Court could say to itself, that's absolutely right, and there is no issue of law for us to resolve. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities that the Supreme Court will not even accept the case for review.
Okay. Glenn, do you still expect a trial date in the DC case of March 4th, 2024?
I want to say yes so badly, so desperately. I want to say yes, but I can't say yes because listen, it is now on this simultaneous, 2-track sprint to the goal line to see which court is even going to take up the case, take up the appeal and decide it. It feels like there is a real possibility now that the March trial date might slip, but the good news is if it does slip, it will probably only slip a month or maybe two. And the good news, further good news, is that will still resolve this case. And Donald Trump, in my opinion, based on the evidence, will be convicted long before we are bumping up against the November 2024 presidential election.
Can you talk about the timeline of the beginning of a trial to a conviction or to an even a sentence, because it's not exactly as quickly as we might expect. I mean, the number we've been hearing is that the trial would be 4 to 6 weeks, but it wouldn't be like Trump is remanded to custody if he gets convicted at the end of the 6th week if the trial takes that long.
All good questions, and there are no hard and fast answers. Let me start with this general proposition. I tried cases that took a day. I tried RICO cases that took 6 months, and then it took the jury another month or 6 weeks to reach verdicts. Now, this trial is somewhere in between, as you say. The parties have said probably a 4 to 6 week trial. Let me tell you, every single prediction I made in my 30 years as a trial court prosecutor about how long a trial would last, I was wrong. They're always a little bit shorter or a little bit longer than you anticipate them to be. But let's assume we stick with the 4 to 6 week time frame, the projection for how long this trial is going to take. A jury can deliberate for a day, a week, a month, or longer. There is no set time that a jury, must return a verdict in. However, based on the quality and quantity of the evidence, I don't think this jury will have to wrestle with its decision very long. I think they will return guilty verdicts. I think they will do it pretty promptly. Then the next question becomes, what about the sentencing in the event Donald Trump is found guilty by the jury? So generally, a sentencing in a federal case is set for about 60 to 90 days down the road from the date of the verdict. There has to be a big old pre-sentence report, it's called, put together, and that assists the judge in providing information that will kind of help inform what the sentence should be. Now, there are 3 points in the process when Donald Trump could be ordered into prison. One, it could be right after the jury returns a guilty verdict. I think that is unlikely, although frankly, if his name wasn't Donald Trump and he was convicted of these crimes, he would probably go straight to jail. The second point in time where he could be ordered into the Bureau of Prisons would be on the day he is sentenced. And then the third is he could be given some time to, here's a catchphrase you've probably heard before, get his affairs in order. And sometimes there will be a delayed reporting of a week or a couple of weeks, maybe a month. Now, the real outlier, and one that I don't think is in play here, is for Judge Chutkan to sentence Donald Trump to a period of prison incarceration, but allow him to remain on release, remain free, pending the appeal. I don't think she will do that because that will provide zero deterrent value to other, political wrongdoers, other aspiring dictators. So I do think we can see, we are likely to see Donald Trump ordered to report to the Bureau of Prisons very shortly after his sentencing date.
Okay, that's super helpful to know, especially because again, we aren't usually privy to how long everything takes. It just seems like we're told 4 to 6 weeks, and then it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks. But there is a lot of other time for other steps of this built in. Glenn, let's finish off with this. Going back to the U.S. Supreme Court, possibly or likely hearing the immunity case. What's at stake for Trump, depending on how the U.S. Supreme Court rules on this issue in particular?
Just everything. If he ends up being tried because the Supreme Court rejects his claim that a president is king, a president is above the law, a president can't be prosecuted for his crimes, again, that would take us one giant step in the direction of a banana republic. But what's at stake is, I think that's his last best shot at avoiding a conviction and prison. It's this immunity play, because, once it's rejected, and it will ultimately be rejected, then he is going to be in the chute for trial. Whether it's going to start March 4th or it's going to start April, we don't know, but he will be in the chute for trial. And then literally, this is going to sound ridiculous, but literally, absent him fleeing the jurisdiction to a non-extraditable country, a country from which we cannot retrieve him, he's going to go to trial. And I believe, based on the evidence, he's going to be convicted.
Okay, and of course, we'll cover every step of this entire process as it continues to play out, including any rulings from the appeals court or the U.S. Supreme Court. So for those watching, if you want to follow along with this case or his other prosecutions he's contending with, definitely make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.